And we're down to sort of to the last little section of Chapter 18. This is still learning objective 4, but these are the costs to fulfill the contract. Okay, so we did this. Basically, there's going to be certain costs of getting a contract. Maybe there's commissions involved. There could be various other expenses. The terms that you need to be aware of is that if we're going to capitalize the costs related to getting a contract to the contract, they have to be directly related to the contract, incremental, they wouldn't happen unless we had this contract, and recoverable. We've got to be able to bill for them. Okay, so costs that would not have happened without the contract. So it could be the commissions, direct labor, direct materials, direct overhead related to the contract, the various other things that go along with that. Costs that have to be expensed as they happen would be general and administrative not related to the contract, and any wasted labor material, anything that you botched up on the job and you're not going to be able to bill for, you can't capitalize. Okay, the definition when you capitalize something is that it has future economic benefit. If you've wrecked it, there's no future economic benefit, so you can't capitalize that. I don't have any particular questions on this, I don't think, on the exams, but you need to be aware of how to treat the costs to fulfill a contract. So I did not want to skip that. Also, if the contracts are for a year or less, they're generally going to be expensed, okay, rather than capitalized. Okay, so the next thing we get to is, and they come around to this again, this is just a basic, in order to have a contract, it has to be collectible. So if it's probable that you're not going to collect the transaction price, you do not have a contract, okay? So you don't recognize revenue, which makes sense. This whole revenue recognition principle is based on the change in assets and liabilities. And if there's going to be no change in your assets, if you're not going to collect that money, well, you can't book the revenue. So as long as a contract exists, once you say, yes, this is probably collectible, then the amount recognized is not going to be adjusted for how shaky the customer is. Okay, so it's either collectible or not collectible, probably collectible or probably not collectible. As long as you've got the contract, you're assuming it's going to be collectible. So collectability is addressed with that allowance for doubtful accounts. Okay, so now we get to disclosure, and at this point I am not going to have you writing out disclosures or having to memorize what all the disclosures are. Suffice to say, there's a lot of disclosure with this new revenue recognition principle, and any company that has transitioned over to it, that's a whole new sort of data gathering task that they've had to do. So you have to disclose your contracts, you have to disclose significant judgments, and I think that on page 1012 there's a nice summary of this. And at this point, all I really would like you to know is that there's a lot of disclosures here. Okay, so this revenue recognition principle, it's based on contracts, okay? Contracts between the seller and the buyer. And so you have to know the 5 steps to defining what the contract is, because that defines whether you're recognizing the revenue. And those 5 steps, you identify the contract, you figure out all the performance obligations, you figure out the transaction price, and then you have to allocate the transaction price to the performance obligations, recognize the revenue as you fulfill the performance obligations. It's kind of a different framework from how revenue recognition was treated before. There were a lot of inconsistencies. There were, I think, like 180 different papers out for various industries on how to treat revenue recognition. So this new revenue recognition principle seems like it's fairly cumbersome, but it's intended to simplify the whole revenue recognition process in the sense that most industries, and there's a couple of exceptions, most industries are going to be using this one revenue recognition principle rather than 180 different ways to do it. So it's a change of approach from the old earned and realizable. Now you're just going to recognize the revenue that the company expects to collect, or the consideration that the customer expects to collect based on the terms of the contract. Okay, so that takes us through Chapter 18. We do not cover the appendix, unfortunately. You would have loved the long-term contracts and franchises, but with this new revenue recognition principle, it takes up quite a few classes already, and so we don't cover that. So you don't have to worry about the appendices to this chapter. All right, there you go.